Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ifeanyi. I'm the Executive Director of Editorial Programming at Fast Company, and I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Ben Cohen today.
Yo, baby!
I'm being so beloved. So, co-founder of Ben & Jerry's, and honestly, I am just in awe of the work that you do. So I'm very grateful that you made time for us today. So we have a lot of ground to cover. So Ben & Jerry's started nearly 50 years ago out of a gas station in Vermont and has since become what I would argue one of the most beloved brands today, not only for the iconic flavors, but for the values the brand has been rooted in since day one. So I'd love for you to take us back to day one. What were those early conversations like in deciding to make your ice cream brand so much more than just about ice cream?
Well, Jerry and I are friends from junior high. We met in gym class. We were the two slowest, fattest kids in the class.
You look great today.
And, so we had sympathy for people that were bullied and stuff like that. But when we decided to start what was going to be just one little homemade ice cream shop, we said that we want to run our shop the way regular old people on the street would like to see a business run. We wanted to be what we called community-based at the time. And I don't think we really understood how to do it, what it meant to be. But the natural things for us as a small one-shop operation was to have, sponsor free festivals for the community, and we sponsored a free walk-in movie festival, and of course we were giving away ice cream to various community groups and making donations, and at the time there was a big gay and lesbian community in Burlington that we supported.
So
that's what we were doing to start.
Yeah. So was that common? Like, were other businesses doing what you were doing? Because you said it came natural to you, but I think for some people that's anything but. So like at that time when you started Ben & Jerry's with this very clear mission to be a values-based company, were other companies doing that? For-profit companies.
Were other companies doing it? Well, when we had these free movie festivals and when we had these other community festivals, we would get other small businesses that were nearby to be co-sponsors of it. So we were definitely taking the initiative. We were leading it, but there were a bunch of others that were joining with us.
Absolutely. And you mentioned community, which I'm glad you brought up, because in 1984, you made a public stock offering in Ben & Jerry's exclusively to Vermont residents with the idea of spreading wealth within the immediate community. But it was hard for Vermonters to monetize it in a meaningful way, so that's when you took it to NASDAQ a year later and had the national public stock offering of Ben & Jerry's. So as Ben & Jerry's was ascending, did you ever feel like it was hard to keep the mission grounded, like the company grounded in its mission? Like as something grows, it can be hard to really hold on to your values. So did you have any hesitation on going public?
At the time that we went public, our belief, as far as our understanding had evolved, was that essentially business was a machine for making money. And so if we wanted to be of as much service to the community, what we needed to do was give away as much money as possible. And as part of the initial public stock offering, we needed to disclose how much money was going to be being donated. And Jerry and I wanted to do 10% of pre-tax profits. And, the underwriters are saying, that's crazy. The biggest publicly held companies, the average is 1%. Maybe you could do 1.5%. We said, no, it's got to be 10. And they said, well, the street's not going to buy that. We'll never be able to sell the stock. And, we negotiated back and forth, and eventually they got up to 5, and we were still at 10, so we compromised at 7.5, and that was the highest amount of any publicly held company at the time. So we started the Ben & Jerry's Foundation, and, before long, we were totally overwhelmed with applications from organizations that were doing really worthwhile stuff in terms of anti-poverty, feeding people that didn't have enough food, education, housing. And we realized that, even if you put all the foundations together in the entire country, that the needs are so great that, they could only fund a very small portion of them. And that's when we decided that we needed to formalize our mission statement and come up with a social mission, which was equal to the financial mission and the profit mission. So we were so adamant about that they were written horizontally to maintain that they were equal, and that social mission told us to integrate a concern for the community into as many of our day-to-day business activities as possible. And that's when we started to become much more successful at using our business as a force for progressive social change. So we started having a banking relationship with a bank that was a development bank that was designed to attract, to work in areas that other banks were redlining, where they wouldn't loan into. And they were focusing on loaning into those formerly decaying urban areas and attracting deposits from outside the area. And in terms of our the flavors that we chose to make, we would first look around to see if there was an ingredient that we could buy in a way that would benefit the small-scale farmers that were harvesting that stuff. And so we just started integrating more and more social concerns into the day-to-day business.
Right. And it was successful, right? You mentioned this horizontal approach to it, like focusing on, of course, making money. It's a business, but also great products and the social component. And this may sound like an oversimplistic question, but like, why don't more businesses do that? You can have it all. You don't have to be in this position where you can still be profitable, but still do good and still have a great product. So knowing that you were successful doing it, why don't you think more companies do that?
I think more business startups are starting to do that. I think what's happened traditionally is that there was a separation between the for-profit sector and the non-profit sector. And if you wanted to make money, you went into the for-profit sector. And if you had other concerns, social concerns, you went into the non-profit sector. And all that Ben & Jerry's did was combine the two. That and what we discovered is that as this for-profit business does more stuff that's based on social justice, that you form such an incredible, close, deep relationship with your customers who also believe in those same values of social justice, that you end up selling a lot more ice cream and you make more money. And
it could all be so simple. I'm serious. I mean, that's the thing. So we talked about, going public in 1985, and fast forward to 2000 when Unilever acquired Ben & Jerry's for $326 million. But it wasn't a regular acquisition because this deal included legally enforceable provisions that established an independent board with authority over Ben & Jerry's, all their social activism decisions. So I saw somebody online describe it as a prenuptial agreement to protect the brand's soul, which I really liked.
Yeah.
And again, this may sound like a silly question, but why did you care so much? Because you could have easily used that money to support social causes, political causes. So I know they're trying to silence you now, Ben. My God, they just won't rest. But I mean, why did you care so much? Because you could have used that money to fund these issues. So you were so adamant in making sure that the values of Ben & Jerry's stuck with the brand of it. So why did you care so much?
I think that business is the most powerful force in our society. And, I mean, there's really no doubt about it. I mean, it's business that controls our elections through campaign contributions. It's business that controls our legislation through lobbying, and now the news that we get through ownership. And so I think business is potentially the force that can help turn our society around. And, Jerry and I eventually wrote this book, Ben & Jerry's Double Dip, How to Lead with Your Values and Make Money Too. And the book concludes with the idea that business's most powerful tool is its voice. That when business talks, the media listens. You are the media, are you not? The politicians listen, and the public listens. And it was important for me to have Ben & Jerry's retain that voice, and knowing that voice of that business is more powerful than my voice as an individual. And it was the soul of the business. I mean, Jerry and I didn't start the business to make a lot of money. We started the business to make a living. Never realized that it was going to get this big.
Right. So, I mean, I feel like things were going pretty well under Unilever, really until, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like 2021, when Ben & Jerry's announced that it would stop sales in occupied Palestinian territory. And that decision eventually snowballed into Ben & Jerry's filing a lawsuit against Unilever in 2024 because the board felt as if the support of Palestinians affected by the war in Gaza was being stifled by Unilever. And for so long, that provision that you put in place in 2000, that prenuptial agreement to maintain the brand's soul, it was working. So why do you think this particular issue caused so much damage to the relationship with Unilever?
Well, I think what happened was it was actually first in 2021 that Ben & Jerry's pulled out of the West Bank because it was inconsistent with our values, and Unilever was originally okay with that decision, but then once we did it, the government of Israel was not okay with that decision, and what I'm told is that the head of Israel called up the head of Unilever and said, if you don't make this right and get Ben & Jerry's back in Israel, we're going to throw all of the Unilever businesses out of Israel. And they had like 20 of them in there. And so Unilever made this unilateral decision, overrode the legal area that the independent board controlled, and ended up selling off the rights to Ben & Jerry's in Israel to an Israeli. And after that point, the board sued Unilever, and after that point, Unilever started censoring and muzzling Ben & Jerry's about any time it wanted to speak out on a social issue. So, once the bombing began in Gaza, Ben & Jerry's wanted to call for a ceasefire, and Unilever wouldn't let us do it. And then they wanted to, we wanted to, call for, protecting the right to protest for the student protesters, and wouldn't let us do that. And then we wanted to post about supporting the right to free speech or freedom of the press. There was this woman who wrote an op-ed, I think, and got kicked out of school or something. And so they just started censoring and muzzling the company to the extent that Jerry and I came to the conclusion that there was no way that the social mission of the company was going to live on under the ownership of Unilever Magnum.
Yeah. And, that kind of brings us up to speed to today a little bit, because in 2024, Unilever decided to divest its ice cream brands, including Klondike, Magnum, Talenti, and of course, Ben & Jerry's, into this new subsidiary, the Magnum Ice Cream Company. And this is where Magnum has been, you claim that Magnum has been limiting the power of this independent board that you set up, which is essentially squashing those protections that you put in place to speak out and have, these social activism campaigns. So, of course, now you're on this campaign to free Ben & Jerry's and restore the company's independence, which, best case scenario, you get your wish. Ben & Jerry's gets its independence, happily ever after. But realistically speaking, this seems like a very steep hill to climb, and not one that's not worth climbing. I'm so glad you're climbing it. Please keep climbing. But if it doesn't work out how you want it to, what does the next level of success look like?
Well, yes, it is a steep hill to climb. You've got a company who owns something and they don't want to sell it. It's a little hard to get them to sell it, and that's why the reality is that the fate of Ben & Jerry's is in the hands of the public, in the hands of our supporters. If enough people make enough noise and make their feelings heard, Magnum will relent, and they'll see the light, and they'll sell the business to this group of socially aligned investors. And if not enough people do that, Ben & Jerry's just turns into another piece of frozen mush. When we began this Free Ben & Jerry's campaign, I thought we had maybe a 10% chance of success. Then it went up to a 50% chance of success. Now I think it's 60-40.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think we're making a lot of headway.
So, okay. Please, how can we get it to 100?
Well, that's just it. So, visit freebenandjerrys.com. There's write-in letters and petitions to do. There's merch you can get to look as cool as I am.
Right.
But there's other merch too, and there's action on social media. So many people have tagged Magnum with messages about freeing Ben & Jerry's that Magnum has changed their settings, and if you tag them, it doesn't show up on their social media anymore. So you have to go direct to their page and comment, or better yet, subscribe and comment for everyone you get. All of this, the general consumer activism is designed to affect the financial community. Once we can get the financial community, investors and financial analysts and financial journalists to start writing stories, and some of them have already been written about how this doesn't make any sense and you should let Ben & Jerry's be Ben & Jerry's. That from a financial point of view, if you put it simply and you say that the values-led way of doing business that has grown Ben & Jerry's into such a powerful brand is exactly what the Magnum Corporation is in the process of destroying. So it doesn't make any sense from a financial investment point of view. And then on top of that, there's the management distraction for the Magnum Corporation of all this hubbub about freeing Ben & Jerry's. What happened was that the way this was spun off is that for every 5 shares that you held in Unilever, you got 1 share of the Magnum Ice Cream Company. So there's a bunch of funds that bought Unilever stock, because there was a time in Unilever's history when they were doing some fairly socially responsible stuff. And so those people that bought it for those reasons have ended up owning a bunch of Magnum stock. So a big portion of those guys happen to be religious organizations that have money and they have stock funds. And I'll be speaking to the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility about this issue and trying to get them to start sending letters and start divesting their stock from Magnum. Yeah. And that's what it comes down to, is affecting their stock price.
Right. And, after decades of activism through business, because again, I mean, you've been at this for nearly 50 years, what have you learned about the limits and the possibilities of capitalism as a tool for social change?
I think there are no limits on capitalism as a tool for social change if people decide to use it for that purpose. Right now, it's being used for social change in the wrong direction. But I think that the reality is that there's more and more transparency, and people are starting to find out more and more what these corporations are doing with the money that we as consumers give them. And I think they pay attention. When Ben & Jerry's gets a bunch of people upset about a particular stand that we may have taken, it rises all the way up to the board of directors level. And I think that if you can, because the responsibility of a board of directors is reputational management. And I think if you start attacking the reputations of some of these huge corporations that are totally screwing people, could be all change.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm curious, if you had to design a warning system that alerts founders when their mission is being diluted or subverted, what signals would that system monitor? When should the founders ears prick up when they decide, oh, this mission it's kind of going a little left?
If you're not getting any pushback, I keep on saying that if everybody already agrees with a particular issue, you don't need to take a stand on it. Most companies, they don't want to take a stand on anything because they're afraid that, someone's not going to like it. So they only take stands on stuff that are totally non-controversial. You don't need to take a stand on that. And part and parcel of taking a stand that's meaningful is that there are going to be people that are opposed to it. And that's okay. The reality is that you do not need 100% of the population to buy your stuff. Ben & Jerry's, our customers are about 5% of the population. Yeah, people are going to object. It's fine.
Right. And I definitely want to talk about your recent campaign, Up in Arms, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So this is your effort to reduce military spending in the U.S. And just to give everyone a sense of this mission, the U.S. spent $919.2 billion on national defense in 2025. That's $919.2 billion with a B. And what you're pushing for with Up in Arms is that for that federal spending to go to things like affordable housing, healthcare, education, and so on. So I'd love it if you can tell us a little bit more about Up in Arms and how you're going about executing this mission.
Yeah, when it comes to the federal budget and when it comes to, the issue of advocacy, you know, a company can say, you know, I'm going to give some money to people that don't have enough to eat, or I'm going to give some money to people who need some healthcare services. And that's a good thing to do. But the reality is that compared to what the federal government could do, it's, you know, it's a drop in the bucket. And so this issue was driven home to me when Ben & Jerry's got up to a level of about $300 million. And for the first time in my life, I had a sense of what $1 billion could be. It was 3 times what the size of what Ben & Jerry's was. And it is a shitload of money. I mean, you know, if you counted every second since you were born, it would take you 33 years before you got up to 1 billion seconds. It's unbelievable. And so today, the Department of War budget is just about $1 trillion. I don't know how many seconds that is, but it's a lot. and you know, Trump decides that, well, you know, I think I can find another $500 billion around somewhere. I'm going to add another $500 billion to the Department of War budget and make it $1.5 trillion. And, you know, for that, so that's the first thing that comes into his head. Let's buy more weapons. What you could do for $500 billion, you could feed everybody in our country and around the world who doesn't have enough to eat. You could provide health care for everybody who needs it. You could provide housing for everybody who needs it. You could make child care affordable. The homelessness would be over. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And so that's what Up in Arms is about. It's about trying to explain to people those trade-offs.
Absolutely.
And the idea that, you know, it's not that we don't have enough money. We've got more than enough money. We're just spending it in the wrong places. And the idea that the American dream is no longer attainable is a decision that's been made by the federal government to fund the Department of War instead of the things that actually really make people secure.
Right. And, you know, I mentioned earlier this, you know, steep hill that you have to climb with free Ben & Jerry's, but I mean, even with what you're talking about with Up in Arms, I mean, it so often feels like doing good. It feels like you take 2 steps forward and you get pushed back like 5 steps. So for you, have you ever lost hope in this push and this fight that you've been doing for decades? And if so, how did you get it back? I want hope, Ben. I'll be very frank.
Well, as the recently departed Jesse Jackson said, we got to keep hope alive. I believe that, as Martin Luther King said, you know, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it does bend toward justice. When I first heard that quote, I thought, well, well, if it's going to bend toward justice anyhow, how come I need to work so hard at it? But it doesn't bend toward justice unless we all work at bending it toward justice. And, you know, some of these struggles go on for generations, and that's okay. I mean, you can either accept the injustices and not do anything about it, or you can do your best to make them right. And maybe they'll be made right in your lifetime, and maybe they'll be made right in your kid's lifetime. But at least be on the team. At least be doing the work.
Ben, thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you so much for the work that you do. Truly, I really appreciate it. Just give it up for Ben Cohen.